So hello and welcome to the Jefferson Educational Society's digital programming. I'm Ben Speggen. I'm a vice president at the Jefferson Educational Society and am a contributing editor at the Erie Reader. Now joining me in conversation is Mr. Preston Love Jr., an acclaimed author, professor, and a long-term activist. Preston Love Jr. is here to discuss A Clear Vision, the follow-up book to his groundbreaking Economic Cataracts, a chronicle of efforts to remove the obstacles of urban community engagement and economic inclusion. We will explore his unique approach to building diversity, equity, and inclusion, the nonprofit he founded, the Institute for Urban Development, forurban.org, including a look at community engagement, economic and leadership growth, and his other organization, Black Votes Matter. The manager for Jesse Jackson's 1984 presidential campaign, I'll ask Mr. Love Jr. to reflect on his recently published Jackson Papers, his children's book, Your Bridge to History, and his annual Black History Tour. And if there's time, maybe, Preston, we can even talk about your days as a Nebraska Cornhusker football player. You are an inductee to the Nebraska Black Sports Hall of Fame. Your work as a pioneer marketing executive at IBM, how you're also a microcomputer historic innovator, opening Atlanta's first retail computer store in 1980. Your work with Andrew Young, the fact that you're a gospel soloist, a playwright, a stage performer, a newspaper columnist, a lecturer, and University of Nebraska, Omaha adjunct professor teaching Black politics and political science. A true Renaissance man and man for many and all seasons. Preston, did I miss anything?
No, but that didn't sound like me.
It certainly is you, sir. And so for all of you taking a look at this viewing, since it first is airing live on the Jefferson's Facebook page, we're going to work our way through as many questions from you, the viewers, as we can as we host this event. If you have a question, just leave it in the comment section below, and we're going to do our best to get to those. If you are watching a later broadcast of this event, please do feel free to send the Jefferson your questions, and we'll get them along to Mr. Love Jr. as best we can. And of course, for more information about upcoming Jefferson Educational Society programs and publications, please visit www.jeserie.org and like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Mr. Preston Love Jr., thanks for joining me for this discussion.
Well, Ben, I consider you a friend, and I surely consider the Jefferson Educational Society my friend as well. We go back what seems like 20 years, but it's only been about 3. But I surely enjoyed my relationship with you in 2017, where I came to Erie, Pennsylvania, in the right time of the year, if I remember, and I had a chance to speak with some of the society. And it's amazing how things have evolved in just a short 3 years. In not only our lives, but probably your organization, and surely my organization, and the things that have caught my attention and things that are demanding my attention. And we'll be talking about some of those today. But it's a pleasure to be on, and all of your viewers and listeners, is it nationwide?
We are nationwide. We are global, thanks to the internet. We're so grateful that we have the opportunity to keep the programming at the Jefferson going amidst the pandemic. We didn't want to shut our proverbial doors, even though we had to shut our physical ones. So here we are, still offering programming. And Preston, when you last talked, you talked to people in Erie, but now we have a global reach. So we are grateful for you to be here, grateful for the audience to be here tuning in. I'm excited to get going. You mentioned Economic Cataracts, and that was how we initially had contact in 2017. I reached out. I told you that I really thought, to me, the book was gripping material presented clearly and with intention. One of the things that I think is also attention grabbing is just the title, Economic Cataracts. So walk us back to the beginning and really tell us, why that title, how it got started, a little bit about the book. And then I want to move on to the things you're working on today, the things of the moment.
Well, quite frankly, the book Economic Cataracts was a book that I wrote to set up the future in terms of dialogue, maybe another book. But it had to do not with eye surgery. Let me get that clear. And I had several people who sometimes are fingering through my books, and they look at me like, eye surgery? But no, it had to do with making a cute statement, if you will, profound, if you go a little deeper, about the fact that the economics of poverty and urban centers, the solution, quite frankly, was not that difficult, but it appeared to me that the communities at large had cataracts. They could not see clearly where the solutions were and where the solutions could be. And so that's where the title came from. It appears that, to me, intellectually, that people just had cataracts in their vision in terms of what should be done. And now I remind you that that was in 2017, way before some of the dialogue that we're having now. Had I written that book at that time, it still would have been appropriate to call it Economic Cataracts. So that book was based on the theory that poverty-stricken communities have impediments to become involved in every way, and that the solution was the investment and growth of wealth of poverty-stricken communities, which is a long-term situation, but that it was based on the economics. That's where the economics part came to that question. We explored many other things in the book, but that was the premise. And when I came to speak with the Jefferson Society in 2017, my presentation was entirely on economic frameworks and theory and that manifested what could happen to make the change, which would then remove the cataracts.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there, in that there's so much to still talk about that's still relevant, even though so much has happened in between 2017 and now. And I think the hopeful message that I continue to enjoy from that book is, and I'm no doctor and I don't play one on TV, but what I do know about cataracts is that there is a medical procedure, there are treatments, there are ways to work through that.
Yeah.
And so you presented that in a way that made sense of there is a treatment plan and how we can address poverty. And I want to get to your work on economic development, and I want to get to your follow-up. But when you and I first started talking about doing a digital program here, one of the things that we kept talking about was how we were both hearing folks say that 2020 feels different. It's different than 1990s, the 80s, 1968, and so on. To you, what feels different about today in the conversations that we're having when it comes to race conversations, poverty conversations, economics? How do we make sure we're not retreading the same conversations we had in the 90s, the 80s, 1968? What feels different to you, Preston Love Jr.?
Well, Ben, let me just preface my answer by saying you could ask that question to anybody. And so before I answer, I have to put myself in context so that my answer could be interpreted in context. And I put my answer in context because I have lived through the cycles. I really even have a theory that I'm not getting ready to fully advance right now, but it would be subject to another interview. And that is called the historical roller coaster, which essentially says that peoples of color, African Americans, have gone through a roller coaster where maybe the lowest point to begin that roller coaster ride was slavery and its residuals and the harshness of lynching and all those things. And then after the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, that roller coaster began to rise. And it peaked in what we call the Reconstruction area. And I could take you through, Ben, the ride, the peaks, the roll down, the low, the ride back up. And so when I answer, I'm giving it to you in the context of someone who arrived on the scene doing the ride back up. And that ride back up in that part of the roller coaster ride was the civil rights movement. And the civil rights movement was rooted in response to Jim Crow, which was the low part of that roller coaster ride. And so the civil rights movement began to inch up towards a peak. But that civil rights movement, if you took a picture at that time, remember, a roller coaster does not stop. Well, it should not stop. But if you took a picture of the roller coaster and made notes, you could take that picture and apply those notes to 2020, because the challenges, the calls for change had different names, but they were the same marches. They weren't really the same marches, and we can talk about that in a minute. But the elements of the marches and the calls for change and reform, Ben, are the same conceptually as we face right now. And so I bring the uniqueness to your question, and maybe some more, of having witnessed it, studied it, now teaching it, and feeling it. And so I could bring wisdom and experience and maybe some know-how to where we go from here. But I do say this, that there is an answer to your question, is there is one element that I perceive to be different. And that for some odd reason, and we could play around with what we think those reasons are. But there seems to be a high intensity of sensitivity and real propensity to actually listen and learn and to make change. Not as a direct response to the march in the streets, but a direct response to internal consciousness that people seem to have. And it all, I think, focuses on really a knee and a neck and a breath. As history often does, it provides the one situation, whether it be the cross, if you will, or whether it be the Edmund Pettus Bridge, as you will, or the assassination of King, as you will, or the knee on the neck of George Floyd, as you will, to make all of the calls for change happen in another sort of way. In this generation, with the advent of the direct video, not the filmed video, most of the civil rights movement was recorded, but it was mostly after the fact and in short clips. We watched it real time. There was a song in the 70s that said that the revolution would not be televised. Well, actually, that was so profound in those days, and we laughed about that. Actually, it was not true. The revolution is being televised. But I think Frank Beverly was the author of that. So when we all, as a society, witness, that means friends, foes, and all, there was an effect that has rippled through our country like never before. And so the opportunity for change, Ben, the key word in that sentence is the opportunity for change, I think, is as prime, as fertile as ever, even from the context of a person like me who has the experience and the wisdom of having lived through some of the other opportunities for change.
I think you're spot on there, Preston. The fact that we can watch for 8 minutes and 46 seconds the knee of one man placed on the knee of another man's neck, and see that, not like you said in clips that we've seen in the past, and the internet has just had a profound effect on the conversation. More of us can talk, more of us have an opportunity to listen. Maybe one of those things is more important than the other. But I have to imagine that having this conversation with children is no easy task as people walk them through what's happening now. But you, sir, have written a children's book and talking about bridges. They are in our minds right now with the passing of Representative John Lewis. And,
Yes.
we think of that. But you've written a tremendous children's book called Your Bridge to History. And you're someone who's lived the history and are working to build that bridge. Tell us a little bit about the children's book. Why write a children's book to help work through conversation there?
Yeah. You know, Ben, as much as I have respect for you, I'm going to answer your question in a minute. I want to say just very briefly and make reference to how we evolved, and my little reference on your other question is the other dynamic besides the knee is, I think, society is witnessing and feeling and experiencing the realities of George Floyd and all of what it means. But with one other element in the brain cell is that we're all vulnerable to die. And because of the virus, we have that fragile feeling that death is not elusive. It's right here in front of us. And while it might not be a knee, we could die from the virus or something else. And I think that gives a spirit of maybe we should try to address these things while we can.
Well, and I think too, aside from the virus, because I think it's so apt, and Dr. Paris Baker had written a report for the Jefferson talking about the two viruses, one being racism and one being
Yes.
COVID-19. And
Yeah.
I think that he's got an astute observation there. But it's also, we can die by just being in the mistaken house that someone enters, a police force enters without warrant, and
Yes.
we're shot in our own home like
Yeah.
Breonna Taylor. That's one of the things that can happen too. And I think that that's such a poignant observation of, we are very aware of our own mortality in our own reality as we're walking through it. And I think that's a helpful way for us to have really tough conversations together, thinking about lives and how, lives matter, and how we've treated it differently in our history of valuing certain lives more than others, as just how we've done that. But to your children's book,
Yeah.
Your Bridge to History. Tell me about that. How are we
Well,
helping children
I
understand these issues?
have to preface the discussion of the children's book of how it arrived to me, and I'll be brief with the preamble, if you will. I want to say real quickly, though, that it's funny, I didn't catch his name, but I wrote two editorials for our local newspaper, and one of them was just the same, that there were not two viruses, but two pandemics. So I'd love to read his, and I'll love him to read mine. And the two were the same. They were the virus, and they were racism, and how they converged. That's another story. I've got two shows or two interviews coming up that we set up here. But so every year, and it all began in Erie, Pennsylvania. I met a dear friend of mine, and he introduced me to an idea, not an idea, but something that he had been doing for, at that time, over 20 years, where he took youth from Erie to the southern part of the states and did a tour. I was fascinated by it. The idea, went back, came back to Omaha, Nebraska, designed my own tour, but it mirrored a lot of his stops, if you will. We approached it a little different, but we went to initially the same stops. But I wanted to give him credit and tell the people his name, if you can recall it.
Yeah, so the wonderful work that Gary Horton has done in the
Yeah,
community with
yeah,
the tours where he's taken youth from within the city and explored their living history through trips along the South. And it's been great to see that continue to happen. and how that's grown. And Preston, it's been great to see you take that on from Nebraska and to be able to take that into Omaha and work through that as well.
Sure. And we, of course, think we put a lot of our own things in it, but it is based on that tour by Gary. But so we take, and this, I haven't forgotten the question, but we take 40 or 50, last year we took 100, but 40 or 50 annually we take high school kids, high school only, to the iconic historical, primarily civil rights history venues in the South. Very quickly, we go to Memphis, Tennessee, Jackson, Mississippi, Birmingham, Tuskegee, Selma, and coincidentally, because of the current news across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, Montgomery, Atlanta, and back, and we raise the money. It's all expenses paid. It's transformative for those kids. And we could do, okay, now we're in the third program. We could do a program on the tour because of what's behind the tour, and what we're trying to do is teach our kids, our high school kids. And let me just say this secretly. I don't know, there's probably only a couple thousand.
This is just between you and me, Preston.
Yeah,
it's just us.
Between you and I. But the African American and other kids have no clue about their own civil rights and African American history. That's why I chose to do the tour. And so the tour has been extremely successful. And one of the things, as a side, and the next sentence after this will be about the children's book, but is that how much feedback I've gotten this week for all the alumni, children, kids, young people of the tour who saw the Edmund Pettus Bridge on TV as they watched John Lewis, his final voyage. And so that has been gratifying. But because of that success in the tour, I begin to feel guilty, quite frankly, that, oh my goodness, I wish that I could share some of this with our toddlers, with our second grade, third, fourth, and fifth graders. And I decided at some moment in time, usually about 3 a.m, Ben, that I would write a children's book and try to give the kids of those grades some connection. And so it was written mirroring our tour, and it walks through the tour, and it's turned out to be extremely successful. 2 weeks ago, we received a national award, an India award from Next Gen, I think is the name. The book, we now have the book both in English and bilingual, but it walks the kids for teachers and for parents. It walks them through our tour, which teaches them in a fun sort of way about their history. And just one little side story is that I teach them about voting by asking, I always take a jar of jelly beans and I ask the kids to choose which color they like. And one says red, one says this one. And when we get through, I teach them the lesson that is what you just did, is you voted for your preference. And that's what voting is about. And that's what part of the tour is about. The children's book, as you said, Your Bridge, the history, the bridge being the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and has done very well in elementary schools. It has been funded indirectly by Title I funds. In most of the large purchases that I have from the book have been Title I purchases by the school districts that interact. We love that book, and we're just glad about it, but that's how it occurred.
Well, and it's so timely now, and it'll continue to be timely as we continue to learn our history, as we lose the lions of this movement,
Yeah.
losing John Lewis amongst others that we've lost in recent days. Another time I want to take us back to before we get to, and I know I promised everybody we're here to talk about A Clear Vision, your latest book, but I want to talk about the other book. I want you to take us back to 1984, the presidential campaign. Talk about the Jackson Papers, the other book that you've written regarding your time with Jesse Jackson.
Yeah. Well, I want to say that all of my books, I'm a university professor with a master's degree. And so I could talk big scholarly talk, drop a few scholarly words, and write a big scholarly book. All of my books are, you could not prove it, because I wrote them in a non-scholarly way. I wrote them for folks to read easily, not to have to, I know how to do the other side.
They're very accessible. They're so accessible.
Intentionally. But so I say that to say the books are shorter than a lot of other books. They're my Jackson Papers, when Jesse Jackson, well, first of all, just quickly I think you may have mentioned it in my introduction, I was working for Ambassador Andrew Young in Atlanta, Georgia. I was the commissioner of planning for him. And the story of how we met and all this is my fourth program coming
I
up.
love that you're giving me content here to work through the next month. Preston, you're fantastic.
I would like you to put an asterisk, the Jefferson Education Society asterisk, the Preston Love Show. But so I'm working for Andrew Young, former ambassador to the UN, congressman, and all of that, but then mayor, and met the Reverend Jesse Jackson, who was a great friend and cohort with Young under Martin Luther King. And so they were interacting. Anyway, to make a long story short, he and I met, got to know each other, and we got closer as friends, and he asked me to take a leave of absence from my job with Andrew Young and organize and run his presidential campaign in 1984. I did that. And so that's the how the Jackson Papers are is a short book of 4 chapters, each chapter talking about some uniquely historic but unknown things about my run with Jesse for the presidency. It included so when you read it, it's not so much about the how many delegates and that sort of thing, what city did we go to. It was about some really fun and profound inside stories about Jesse Jackson during that time. And I'm not going to tell all of them, but I'm going to tell one.
I was going to say, can you tease us with just one? Because I'm going to encourage people to go buy the book, but just give us one to tease us. Please.
But in order, Jesse Jackson was known as a civil rights leader and all of that, but he wasn't, it's a great story to tell about how he got to be the candidate in 1984, because 1983, Harold Washington was elected as the first African-American mayor of Chicago, and the black leadership, national black leadership, has several sources of series of meetings thinking, if we could do that, then we can run a black for president. And so the question became, who would it be? And, there were some heavy hitters at that time. Jesse Jackson was not on that list. He was in the meetings. And so when they all got through, nobody wanted to do it. And Jesse held his hand up. And that's really how that happened. But he was not thought of as having the intellectual capability as much as he had great speaking and dynamic, charisma and all that. And whether he would have the ability to sit on this debate stage and debate the very profound and difficult domestic and international issues. So the quick story is, in order for him to bone himself up to do that, Bill Cosby volunteered his residence, and we spent 10 days with Bill Cosby in his that Massachusetts farm with his family and kids. And every day, an expert in a various issue came in and briefed us. And then that night, we had dinner with the Cosbys. And then they would fly out, and the next experts would come in. It was an unbelievable story. It is a little tainted these days because of Bill Cosby's, things, but it was an exciting time. But so the Jackson Papers really it's an easy read, and it is an insight into really some of the personal kinds of things that presidential candidates can get into, just living their life as men and women. And so that's what that book is about. Thank you for asking.
Well, it's remarkable to think that folks in the room thought that Jesse Jackson perhaps didn't have the political acumen or the smarts to be able to do that. And
turned out that they were incorrect.
Very incorrect.
Yeah, because the sequel of that story, Ben, is that after 10 days, my mind was pretty much burned out. I couldn't remember what the guy said on the first day. And, let alone what the guy said yesterday. Jesse internalized all of that. And if those who were there or who have read about it, he was exemplary on the stage, was able to talk domestic and international issues. And so that was that book. And there is a little thing, and I'm not sure how we're doing for time, but I surely want to mention that during that time where I met Jesse, I was with Andrew Young, as I mentioned, but one of the jobs I had also is I had the job of whipping the Atlanta City Council. And guess who was on that city council? John Lewis. And so that's when I met John Lewis. John Lewis and I were extremely close friends for 40 years, but I met him trying to whip him as a city council, and whipping meaning get him in line for the mayor, and he was, quite frankly, impossible. He was so sure of his feelings on things, and they were all righteous all the time. There was no political kind of deals or none of that happened. And so he was horrible, but we always respected him. And then I was there when he ran against Julian Bond for the seat that he held until the day he died. And because of my extreme intelligence and my acumen and everything else, I chose to support Julian Bond. And Julian Bond was the favorite by far, and John beat him for that seat. It's a great historical story.
That's a wonderful and funny anecdote. I appreciate that, Preston. I know I want to push on because I want to get to plenty of other things, but I do want to take a pause right now because we do have some audience questions coming in. And one that I want to read to you is, it starts with a quote, and it says that Thurgood Marshall said that, quote, "History teaches us threats to liberty come at times of urgency when rights seem too extravagant to endure." That's the end quote. Is this also true of economic opportunity, is what that person's asking.
Well, very, very good. I hope that person didn't reach down and get those from their memory. I would surely be impressed and want to get their address, phone number, but how could you disagree with the reference? But I surely, it is kind of somewhat of a segue to what we may talk about in the remaining time, and that is my focus during this time right now is that history has provided us on a silver plate a chance to address egregious things, but especially that of the disinvestment in our urban communities. And so I'm tying both of those quotes together, but I'm surely a fan of the author, but also it surely makes sense in the real world for what we're talking about today. We're talking about and embarking about, and I'm going to let you ask more questions, but about the process and the framework for how do we make change and reform, but with the eye on the economics of it, not just that we have one more African American or so on a board, in a boardroom or something of that nature. That has some value.
Well, another one right in line with that, and I think this continues the conversation, and then we can get into economic development. And I do want to touch on a clear vision because I think it's appropriate here. But this person's asking, Preston, as economic justice is the primary justice to pursue to bend the curve of inequality, what 3 to 5 policies would you promote for local communities to work on to intentionally grow wealth in minority neighborhoods? I think that's spot on of the work you do. How do we grow wealth in neighborhoods that's so desperately needed? And I know this isn't a one size fits all, a silver bullet, and give us the answer, we're going to go home and fix Erie. But when you see different regions you work with, what commonly surfaces of policies either already in place that are working or policies that need to be put in place to make sure that this city, this town, this region, if it's not for all of us, it's for none of us?
Well, I would change the question and make a statement. And that the question really is, how do we do that? And I would say is we need to do it. So that almost answers the generic question, is that it's needed in most urban centers. It does change based on the nature of the administration in the various cities. My city, for example, and we made some comparison between my city and Erie when I came here. But my city has no commitment to the subject of economic development. A lot of band-aids, a lot of profiling is done, but some real change comes in the form of all the sectors working together. Let me tell you quickly what those sectors are. Private sector, which is the corporate, and to some degree nonprofits, but the private sector has to make some commitments. The public sector, which is really the root of that question, has to do some significant things. And if I have time, I'll come back and talk about that. But also the financial sectors have to do that. And then the big time investors for the developmental investors and philanthropics all have to rethink their priorities and rethink what they're missing. And this is where clear vision, my book of clear vision, comes from, is they must see that the benefits that are return on investment benefits by investing in poverty-stricken communities are awesome for the rest of the city. That's the part that seems to be cataract. They don't seem to understand that you're not just going out patting the community on the head and say we'll give you this, we'll give you that. It's about changing the whole nature by building wealth. And how do you do that? Well, you do the things that are necessary to provide impetus to small and emerging businesses. And what you find is their capacity is low, their ability to do the things that larger businesses do automatically. You have to provide some incentives and really maybe even capital on the side to provide accounting services. And when contractors who could get a big contract, but they're not able to buy the materials, you have to build those things into the way in which you design doing business. In the public sector here in the state of Nebraska, affirmative action is illegal. That has gotten to be most of the case across the country. And so it is very difficult unless a corporation or public sector in particular has a desire to use affirmative action. This is not going to happen. And so it has to be, first, it has to be understood that and convinced that it's the smart thing to do, the right thing to do, and that there is return on investment. Building the wealth will change the whole formula, because one of the things about poverty-stricken community, and I'll be quick, is that it is pretty much supported by nonprofits. And that's all good it it should be changed, because if you build wealth, community can take care of itself primarily.
Well, I think that's a time to take us now to where you are with your work, removing the cataracts, as you said earlier. So take us to a clear vision. It's the follow-up to Economic Cataracts. Why was it important now? And that's not to say I expected you to have it done in a year or 2 years after Economic Cataracts came out, but it comes out here in 2020, and we're talking about a clear vision now. Why is that important to you?
It's important now for something we talked about when we first started this conversation, is because now, maybe like never before, and I mean never, not at least in my lifetime. And if you go before my lifetime, it surely was not in the conversation. But now, like never before, there is a heightened and intensive sensitivity to the idea and the probability and the potential of change and reform. And so it's now incumbent on those of us on the other side to articulate what the change and reform is. It's of no, it is of no value to demonstrate for change if you don't have an idea up front of what that change would look like. Now, when we focus on the policing and that one kind of is defining itself. But what about the other areas, about healthcare disparities? What about disparities in home ownership and about the criminal justice system and more, the educational gaps and all that? And then my focus, which is the building of wealth and the disinvestment. And so the time is now, because the sensitivity and the potential for the change to be enacted is real now. And so I package, for example, my wisdom and experience and know-how into an organization called For Urban Development, the Institute for Urban Development. It has 4 pillars real quickly, and that is community development, economic development, youth development, and of course, voter participation. And so, but we have some offerings that come under diversity and inclusion and equity. And they, in effect, are the answer to the question, which is where do we go? We've got to develop and help the public, private, and philanthropic sectors understand how they may turn that into change, but that the change makes sense for the communities that they're trying to change.
So you mentioned it right there with the fourth pillar in For Urban with the Black Votes Matter movement. And so I want you to be able to reflect back on just quickly what you've been most proud of, what you would say. But I want to ask you what challenges still keep you up at night, particularly with 2020 being a presidential election year. We see voter turnout goes significantly up during presidential election years, and it's down when it's just municipal races. We see folks not turning out locally. But this is a big election. People's eyes have been on this now for 4 years thinking about this. So what are you most proud of so far with the Black Votes Matter movement, the wins that you've had, but what challenges keep you up right now in 2020 with that?
Well, we're proud. Very shortly, I could develop it, but we're proud of some of the, you can't be proud of the things you're doing in voting unless the impact is you got better turnout. That's the bottom line. But we are proud. But let me tell you how much, Ben, it's a year-round effort. It's not just during election. It's education. It's having people understand not only the issues and the candidates, but how to vote, all the different nuances of voting. And now our big issue is getting people to vote by mail and voting early, to alleviate standing in line because it's designed to make you want to go away, or because you just don't want to stand in line, or being up close to people as it relates to the virus. vote by mail is the way to go. So that's our big challenge right now. But we have had some real recent successes in getting higher turnout in our poverty-stricken community. But I owe that to the recognition of people finally understanding the impact of voting on their own lives. And that's where you have the toughest challenge, is trying to translate the yeah, we had the right to vote stuff to people who haven't lived through it and don't understand that part, to why is it important to vote. And so that's what we do. And we've had some great successes. And I still have that as a major pillar of what I do. And right now, during this phase, the last 90 days or so before, we're intentionally making phone calls and getting people prepared to vote by mail, hopefully. Yeah.
And so in the wake of Black Votes Matter, I've asked this question to other people that I've had the chance to have a conversation with here, and I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you too, Preston. I've asked others, when somebody says to you, and so when somebody says to you, Preston Love Jr., all lives matter, in response to the Black Lives Matter movement, what do you, Preston Love Jr., say to them?
Well, if I only had a second, I'd say I agree. All lives do matter. But just like my organization is called Black Votes Matter, Black Votes Matter, and then the analogy of Black Lives Matter, my answer to I get the same response from people saying, well, why do you say that? Because all votes matter. Yes, but what the difference in Black Votes Matter is I'm talking to the Black community saying, don't you realize that Black votes matter? Get yourself out and vote. But in the case of Black Lives Matter, it's a cry and it's a demand, and it's an emotional cry for people to understand. Don't you realize that so many of our people have been senselessly murdered or killed, and that those lives matter, and they're Black. That's the issue there. It's not a question that other lives don't matter. It's a way to focus your conversation, and maybe to make somebody realize that the George Floyd situation is, you don't say out loud that his life matter, because his life mattered maybe because he was Black. So we have to say Black lives matter, and it's pleading to the gods and to the people to realize, and even to law enforcement to realize that, our lives matter. Don't consider us expendable. And it's not an easy conversation to have. I do say, unfortunately, for those who are heavily involved in the Black Lives Movement, that it has their intent, their core values are surely being corrupted by what people say they are, and those who take advantage of any popular cause. It happened in the 60s, and it's happening now, where people who throw a rock verbally or physically on behalf of Black Lives Matter are really not the people who are running the show for Black Lives Matter. And that it's hard to define it in a big crowd, but the truth of the matter, it's a complex issue. Don't confuse the core message and the core values and the core actions of a group like Black Lives Matter, just like they accused Martin Luther King of being a rabble-rouser and one who, was trying to do bad things, and that communists were part of taking over his organization. And all of that happened, to that movement, just like it's happening now.
I appreciate that answer, Preston, and helping walk us through that, and really centering us on the importance of understanding, making it a focal point, and focusing our attention. We're nearly out of time, but I wanted to make sure I left time. Your tour, the Black Votes Matter tour, we're in the wake of a pandemic, but you're not tossing in the towel. In fact, on your brochure, you write Zoom has a capacity of 300. Facebook's unlimited. Let's break the internet on September 19th, 2020. So when the internet is broken on that date, because so many people tune in, what's it going to look like? How's it going to be different? What's the importance of keeping it going, even through a pandemic, using the digital platform that you have?
Yeah. Well, there's several things that boy, did this time go fast, but several things I'd like to say. We are doing the tour that I mentioned earlier and described. Obviously, we had to cancel this year, so we're doing it virtually, September the 19th. We'll put that link out for people who can plug in all over the country, all over the world, really, by Facebook. We did it primarily because the kids were so disappointed. We wanted to give them something, but now we wanted to make it available to the nation, so we're going to do that. And then, of course, I surely want to, without sounding like a commercial, make myself available to communities or organizations because we have the wisdom and experience and really the tools to maybe help them through making change in their organizations. And so my organization, For Urban Development, it's really forurban.org is the website. You can go and kind of learn about us without me taking a whole lot of time telling, but we're surely capable and sensitive and understand maybe how to help. And so this has been a great experience for me because when people ask questions, including you, Ben, you need to be sure of what you're talking about. And so it makes me feel good about myself that I'm able to understand the questions and know that I know for the various reasons that I do know.
So Preston, we didn't get a chance to dive into your career as a Cornhusker football player, your gospel background as a singer, a stage performer, and so much more about your life. I think that's maybe program 5 as we're lining up the Preston Love Jr. show at the Jefferson. But I'm going to leave on just the sum up note of, and I wanted to make sure we got the information in there about the Black Boats Matter tour. We're talking about so much, and it's a heavy time. It's a different time. So I asked you, if somebody came up to you and said, if all lives matter, what do you say to them? A different context. Somebody walks up to you and says, Preston Love Jr., I want to help. I just don't know where to get started. Other than, and I'll tell them to do this, go read your books, go over to your website, forurban.org. What do you tell them if they're looking for just a quick, get me started, light the fire, how do I help?
Well, it may surprise you and surprise them. And I suggest that they use every measure that they have to just listen for a while. Listen for a while. Don't jump. Just listen for a while and then learn a little bit and then reach out to something that's caught your ear, caught your fancy, caught your intellect, and it'll work itself out. There's a lot of need, but you're much more valuable to people like myself if you've been listening and you've learned than if you just arrived and won an assignment, so to speak. So that's the key. But we surely are open via our website. I sound like a used car salesman, but it's the window into us and the work that we do is surely the website, which again is the number 4, forurban.org. And then all of the things, including the election-related things under the banner of Black Votes Matter, are discussed, and the ways to get involved, not only maybe with us, but remotely in your own. There are connections that maybe we could help you make. But it's been a marvelous pleasure, Ben, and we've just touched the surface. I'm looking for 5 more shows.
I was going to say, I think that the Jefferson can help contact Netflix. We're going to get a series package deal here, the 6 episodes with Preston Love Jr. We have so much more to talk about, but thank you. And pointing people to forurban.org. We're going to have contact information in the comment section of our Facebook page so that folks can get in touch with you, Preston. But Mr. Preston Love Jr., the author of A Clear Vision, Economic Cataracts, Your Bridge to History, the Jackson Papers, founder and director of the Institute for Urban Development and forurban.org. and so many other accomplishments. Cornhusker football player, Hall of Fame, gospel singer, work with Andrew Young, work with Jesse Jackson, working on John Lewis, and so many more things. Thank you for taking the time for this discussion here for the Jefferson programming.
Thank you very much, and look forward to talking to you down the road. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, thank you so much, Preston, and thanks to you, all of you watching along at home, tuning in real time and watching a later broadcast of this event. And of course, for more information about the Jefferson, please do visit www.jeserie.org. That's for both past and upcoming programs, as well as publications. And be sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For the Jefferson Educational Society, I'm Ben Speggen. Be safe, be sound, and thanks for listening and learning with us.